All right, it's 2 o'clock, so I think it's okay to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Monahan, and I'm a communications strategist here at the Ohio Arts Council, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Trauma-Informed Practice, Part 2, an Ohio Perspective. So last month, in Part 1 of this series, we were introduced to the concept of trauma-informed care. And today, we continue the conversation with a focus on what 2 Ohio arts organizations are doing to meet the needs of those affected by trauma. But before we get started with the presentation, there are just a few housekeeping items to go over. First, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. This just helps to cut down on any feedback issues during the presentation. So if you have questions, absolutely feel free to type them into the Q&A box in your control panel, and we will leave plenty of time at the end of the presentation for those questions. If you have any audio issues or trouble connecting, we recommend refreshing your browser, and if that doesn't work, try logging off and then logging back in. Finally, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll post the recording on our YouTube channel by the end of business on Friday, June 28th, tomorrow. So if you aren't able to catch the entire live session or you would like to listen again, you can find it there. So that takes care of all of our housekeeping items. Now on to the main presentation, and I'm going to start by introducing the people responsible for coordinating this webinar, the OAC's very own Arts Learning Coordinators, Chiquita Mullins-Lee and Jared Small. And together, Chiquita and Jared oversee arts learning grant programs, including those that support artist residencies, student visits to arts experiences, partnerships between organizations and schools conducting projects with arts learning at their core, and other special initiatives and activities for learners of all ages and abilities. Chiquita, Jared, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Katie. It is great to be working with you again. I will go on and say that in our previous webinar, Trauma-Informed Practice, Part 1, we heard from 2 experts from the Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, Chandra Cowling and Sarah Davis. And they provided an introduction to trauma-informed care, its impact on students, and how educators and arts administrators can use the arts to address childhood trauma. Today, in Part 2, we are going to focus on Ohio. And this is sort of us coming back to the home front, bringing it to the home front. Because in Ohio, we have some amazing arts organizations, and 2 of them are represented today. So we're going to talk about how these organizations use the arts to address the needs of youth and adults whose lives have been impacted by trauma. I am really very thrilled and excited to welcome Bo Hauser, who is the director of Project Jericho in Springfield, Ohio, and from the Athens Photographic Project, the executive director, Nate Thompson, and Mitzi Kleiber, who is an artist with the Athens Photographic Project in Athens, Ohio. And I think we're going to start with Nate and Mitzi. So welcome to the webinar. And I guess maybe Jared, if you have anything to say, please do.
That's a great introduction. Just want to say good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here. This is Jared Small, by the way. Thanks for hopping on. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
All right, Nate and Mitzi, you're on.
All right, well, thank you. We are really honored to be part of this webinar today. This is a very important topic, and one that I think it's so wonderful that the Ohio Arts Council is taking the time to take on and bring more awareness to. So our goal for today is to share a little bit about our organization and how it relates to trauma-informed practice. So Mitzi and I will be co-presenting. I'm going to provide a very, very brief overview of our organization for folks that are unfamiliar with it. And then Mitzi, as an artist and an advocate, is going to share her story as an artist and really share from a first-person perspective how the program that we've developed over a 20-year period has been supportive and has been maintaining trauma-informed practices. So just kind of to start very broadly, the Athens Photo Project is based in Athens, Ohio, and we're a community of artists dedicated to using photography as a tool for self-expression, personal growth, and social change within the journey of mental health recovery. And the photo that's on your screen is of our studio, which we recently dedicated to our founder, Elise Sanford, just this past spring, 2019. So our organization is arts-based, and it is a component of mental health recovery and of the mental health recovery network of care that's here in Athens. And for nearly 20 years, we've looked at the assets of the arts and how they can serve real needs in mental health recovery. And we've developed a model that relies on these 4 aspects that are on the slide being shown, which include arts education, arts mentoring, peer support, and arts exhibits, really as our tools to arrive at a goal of individuals rebuilding a meaningful and engaged life in the community through the arts. And I'll kind of break that down a little bit for everybody. But this is something, this is a model that is very much in line with what's known as the mental health recovery model, which really believes that anyone whose lives is affected by a mental illness really deserves to have tools and support to rebuild a meaningful and engaged life in the community. But it is very unique in a rural community such as Athens County to have the arts as that vehicle. So we'll kind of share a little bit about how that's all developed here. So the Athens Photo Project was founded in 2000 by Elise Sanford. And Elise Sanford founded the project because she was a concerned mother. She passed away in spring 2018, but for years and years she had lived in Athens and had witnessed changes in the mental health system of care. And her son had utilized services, both inpatient services, outpatient, and Elise and the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Athens felt that the community supports that were in place were just not enough, both in our community but in others. They looked at the mental health service network having many gaps that were resulting in folks maybe still receiving clinical services, but living with a lot of shame and stigma and marginalization. And Elise and her friends at NAMI Athens felt like that their children really deserve more. And Elise happened to be trained as a photographer, and she was able to make the connection that for herself in her own life, photography really gave new outlets for her voice and really awakened her voice and allowed her to connect with new people. And she saw that if she was able to teach photography to folks facing this marginalization, that they too would have the opportunity to express themselves in new ways, find new value in themselves, and to be able to self-advocate and share that message with the community at large. So Elise began the project by offering just 10-week photography classes followed by exhibitions. And there's so much interest from folks to get involved in the classes here in Athens that she was teaching and to come out to the exhibitions that Elise just kept going with this. And year after year, individuals were coming to her wanting to get involved in the classes. Counselors and case managers within the mental health system were coming to her, referring folks for the class when they started realizing how transformative this process was. And again, it's an art-based program. Elise is not a clinician. She has the sensitivity of a family member, right? And really kind of the gusto of someone who's was a very strong mental health advocate. But she wasn't coming at this as a clinician. So the roots of our program are really not based in therapy as much as they're based in arts as a vehicle for change and transformation that includes therapeutic aspects, but really is a non-clinical model. And as Elise started leading 10-week classes, she was noticing, and over the last 19 years, we've noticed trends that individuals who are coming into this program really face major barriers. So again, people may have clinical support, but in order to achieve that goal of having a meaningful, engaged life in the community, there needs to be more. They need to have more tools at hand. And some of the barriers that they're facing are civic engagement, stigma, self-worth and value, isolation, struggles with meaning and purpose, and a history of trauma. So over this time, this 19 years, we've really looked at photography as being a solution to these barriers that I just mentioned. And photography, the nature of it, is one that encourages folks to explore and connect with the world around them in the moment. And I think as this, this first point really relates to trauma-informed practice. I mean, all of the points do, but just that connection, rebuilding that connection with the world is something that there's a lot of trauma associated with living with mental illness, being hospitalized, the stigma, etc., to where photography really encourages someone to go out into their community and develop new relationships and look at the world from a new perspective and develop value in their perspective. Photography allows someone to balance their observation and their imagination. So what Elise noticed as a teacher in the project, and I've noticed as a teacher in the project, is that every single person coming into this program has an amazing, amazing sense of imagination, of observation, of really, really high intelligence, really, really high emotional intelligence. And it's just, the camera is so accessible that all of that richness just starts pouring through in the images. So while we offer classes at an introductory level, so community members that have not been engaged in the arts, when you look at the artwork, or when I look at the artwork that's coming out of our introductory class, there's a real sense of maturity. It doesn't feel like work from a beginning photography class. And that's because of the maturity of the individuals coming into the program. Our program has served adults for almost 20 years. We've had a teen class for the last 3 years, consistently here in Athens and now in Chillicothe. Our classes are, it's a long-term model. So it's, we offer 30-week programs with classes meeting twice per week. Our teaching teams comprised of peer mentors, folks that have been through our program and are wanting to give back to new artists. We have professionally trained photographers, volunteers, and graduate assistants from Ohio University. So there's a focus on photography. Again, this is non-clinical. However, I think the success of our program model it is really, or I should say that the success of our program model relies on our clinical partnerships. So we're a contract agency of our local mental health board, the 317 board, and partner in conjunction with Hopewell Health Centers, our major behavioral health provider here in Athens. And we have clinical supervision where our instructors meet with a trained counselor each week to process what's happening in class, areas where an instructor may be, may have kind of exposure to secondary trauma, and having that clinical partnership really helps these instructors who are trained photographers not take on all that alone. Our classes are sequential, they're project-based. As I mentioned before, photography really offers the opportunity for skill building and engagement in the world, and part of that is having a sense of structure and purpose and routine. I know the presenters in the first webinar of this series noted that several times that trauma-informed practices do have that sense of choice, but there's also that sense of structure in terms of a best practice. So that's something that it's really worked for us to have curricula with a beginning, middle, and end, so that individuals can be involved for a year and then can move on to the next year with a new challenge. And each of those challenges is, again, pointing to building meaning, building connection, building engagement. We serve Athens County, Athens, Hocking, and Vinton, but primarily Athens. And we do provide all equipment and supplies at no cost, and that's because of the generosity of our sponsors and partners. The approach of our photography classes is making the arts accessible, collaborative. They involve social learning, creative skill building, and they're growth oriented. So it's, while we have aspects of studio art that you would see at a college level class, we also have had to create a program model that recognizes the barriers that people are facing coming into the program, and as the point of this webinar is, the trauma that people have faced. So all of that sensitivity goes into, is balanced with the rigor of a photography class, an introductory and advanced level photography class. The photographs that come out of the program are very diverse. We do have artists that will use this opportunity, or at points in their work with us, use the opportunity to respond to mental health and respond to mental illness quite directly, and take ownership over, as I call it, their health narrative, in a sense, take ownership as an artist over their experiences, both experiences that would be considered traumatic, as well as kind of the gray area of being diagnosed with a mental illness. So this particular image by Edie McGee, I wanted to highlight. This was created in this past year during an art critique class we were leading. And Edie writes about this image that's on your screen. I worked extremely hard on this to show that what I struggle with. It's called disassociation. I will separate. It's like I'm living with it, but I'm watching it at the same time. Stress causes it. So I wanted people to maybe have a feeling of how I feel, because I struggle with this literally almost all the time. This is my world. It's why it's such a struggle sometimes to interact. I try to make pretty and happy, but I wanted to step out of my comfort zone and share what the real Edie lives with every day. This is another image. This was created by Pete Wisher in our mixed media art class in 2018. Pete writes, the title of the piece is Prisoner to Clozapam, which is a psychiatric medication. Welcome to my cell. This is an expression of emotion, a serious and intense emotion. The statement is painted on in words, in images, in structure, in color. Is there a bright side? Is there anywhere light may remove the darkness of my cell? So while there's an opportunity to express these emotions that may not have been expressed regarding a mental health condition, we have, which in the previous webinar would be considered trauma-focused, right? And for those of you that did not were in on that webinar, they looked at trauma practices as being trauma-focused, where you really have maybe an art intervention that is looking at creating dialogue and empowering someone to take ownership over their experiences with trauma, and trauma-informed, which is more creating an environment that recognizes a traumatic history. So, so again, there's an opportunity for artists to directly go at that, but our program is so much broader than that. We're really looking at empowering artists to have the same access to the same photographic training, equipment, etc., that any photographer would have, that any community artist would have, and really looking at them at having the chance to rebuild a whole identity, one that transcends a diagnosis. So the majority of the work that comes out of our project is not work about a mental health condition. It's about kind of the many other aspects and interests of their lives, and the present moment, where the camera leads them in unexpected ways. So I'm going to share two images, two more images here. This is by Randy Lewis, also from 2018. Randy writes, this photograph was created as part of a class project exploring theme of time. We each had to choose a particular aspect of time and focus on creating a photographic series. I chose reflections of time. This image is reflecting some of the memories I have of my grandfather. The next image on your screen is by Donna Lichlighter, 2018 as well. I have been trying to make my style be what I call abstract impressionism. Shannon and I had a disagreement, then made peace with one another. I was left with the feeling of hope and that peace because things had settled. And so I sat down to work with my camera and my heart poured out into this way. The work from our introductory and advanced classes goes out into the community in very diverse ways. We have juried exhibitions where we have state and nationally known photographers review the work that our artists in a group submit to juried exhibitions, and then select from that to create a show. We do public art installations. We have had commission projects and individual shows where our artists have taken advantage of the Ohio Arts Council's Artists with Disabilities Access Program and written for $500 and $1,000 grants to purchase their own equipment, but also to produce their own individual shows. And here are just a few on your screen, just a few examples of our exhibitions. These next three images are from our permanent rotating exhibit that's at our community mall called the Market on State. And these next two images are from a photo cart that we created for Appalachian Behavioral Health Care. This was a commissioned body of work where we focused a 30-week program on learning about arts and healthcare. And as a group, we reviewed research on arts and health. And the artists, there was 40 artists involved in this project. It was an advanced level class. They really decided on the content that they wanted to create to go into a lending library that's still available at the hospital. I think we created this in 2012, 2013, and it's still active where long-term residents at ABH can select work for their hospital rooms, for their rooms at ABH. And it's choice-based. They don't have to have artwork, but there's a peer support specialist who takes a photo card around, and they can rotate work every couple weeks. We recently, in fall 2018, completed an installation in partnership with the city of Athens, where I'll show you in this next slide, we really converted a whole block almost of the downtown city of Athens, the side of the parking garage, into a photo installation. This image on your screen shows one bay of the installation that's titled 1,000 Words, but there are 5 bays that have images on it. So we worked with Hilford & Associates, which is a museum design firm in town, to create an installation that could be exhibited outdoors, but would also engage viewers, pedestrians, as well as folks driving down the road. So our artists are having a major, major impact in the community through these exhibits. And finally, this is from our open house that we just had this past spring, showing the work from familiar places, which the 4 images that I showed, photographs that I showed earlier with artist statements are part of this exhibit. And all of that, right, arts-based activity, as I mentioned initially, really coincides with the goals of mental health recovery. And for those of you not familiar with the goals of mental health recovery, and kind of the actions associated with it, mental health recovery, it's really a philosophy. It's a philosophy of hope, but it is asset-based. It values community contribution, skill building, self-care for an ongoing health condition, and it recognizes that it's an ongoing process of rebuilding a meaningful life, and that social inclusion is vital. So when our artists start the program, again, we're seeing years of isolation that they've experienced, and we feel like it's really unnecessary to have that layer in connection with mental illness. We feel like the arts and other avenues, other tools can help overcome those barriers of isolation and others that I described, stigma, etc. And to build the skills, build the identity as an artist, really, really transforms people, their self-perception, and that's how we define success. So again, to come back to this slide that I started the presentation with, our program model is built on arts education, arts mentoring, peer support, and art exhibits. And with that, I'll turn this over to Mitzi. Mitzi?
Well, I've been living here for around 8 years, and due to a terrible trauma years ago, I was suffering from PTSD, so I decided to go for more counseling. My counselor recommended I try photography with APP. Of course, I was nervous at first, but as I got to know Kim, our instructor, and some of the others, I got a little more relaxed. It's like you have a sense of being in class. A few sessions in, and we were asked to do self-portraits for 3 weeks. It took that whole time for me to be able to take my own pictures, as I would normally hide behind things when cameras came out. But I felt I had to express myself. Can you imagine nearly 40 years of trauma being released into these images? That was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it worked. I was in the moment making a relationship with the world. It wasn't long before I could see where photography got at emotions deep down in me that talk therapy just couldn't get at. APP has been an absolute transformative experience for me. My approach to self-expression in photography even changed. Now I'm making new connections with the world. I've done other projects too, like I made a photography series book that I dedicated to my son, Matthew, who used to be on hard drugs, but now he's been clean for over 2 years. Also, I have a beautiful granddaughter, Amelia, that I love photographing, and I have so much fun doing street photography. Now my goal is to understand my camera even better and learn about Photoshop. There's a lot I could say about PTSD and APP, but I can't share everything today. However, I do have something I'd like to share. The easiest way to explain PTSD is this. You know that song you can't get out of your head in the morning and it's stuck there all day annoying you? Well, I imagine that, but replace it with vivid images of a horrific event that happened, but it replays through your mind day and night continually. Even asleep, there's no escape. And it can occur at any point, even when you're driving, working, or talking with your friends. It's like you disappear into a world of hurt that only you can see. And to you, it's as real as the moment that that traumatic event happened. Tasks that used to be easy became too complicated because you can't focus clearly. It's like a haze. My PTSD brain has parts missing because trauma has blocked them out forever. I tried to put the pieces together, but they didn't make logical sense, or they didn't always fit. Parts are so coated with intense emotions that they are hard to see. And my anxiety would skyrocket when I was in crowds and public places. You know, people still do judge those with mental health issues. This archaic notion that if a wound isn't visible, it's not real, is still highly prevalent today. Society has painted a picture that PTSD doesn't have a face, and that's sad. For me, getting out of my head and spending time doing something different is really helpful. People find healing in lots of different kinds of things, and photography is just one of those things. Through APP, I use photography to help heal myself from the trauma I suffered. It was extremely difficult to share my story behind those images I created, but it was exactly what I needed. This isn't a cure, it's a coping skill or a tool to give people back their lives and maybe create something beautiful. Through APP, photography serves a purpose of escape and allows me to be in my own little world. It gives me a little better voice and teaches me more to be careful and to observe more. Photography helps me to see the beauty in the world and not to focus on my triggers. It's not only been a way to disconnect from daily stress, but a way to get a break from vivid images of that horrific event. It works for me, and I want to share that knowledge. With my camera, my focus is quite intense, so other distractions find it hard to break through. To add, I think the excitement of the potential images you can get really helps engage the brain and focus on the positive side of life. Now the cost or the quality of the camera doesn't matter. Look on the internet. There's millions of great images captured with cell phones. And it isn't even about the quality of the image the photographer creates. It's about seeing the good and avoiding the triggers. However, if you do want a good image, most of the time you need to find a good location. And part of finding that location is exploration. A good walk, which is one of the things that we do here at ATP, does wonders for the mind. And being out in nature really helps relieve stress. All of these things help create positivity in the mind and to let go of your past negative experiences. Also, the validation of others liking your images gives you an ego boost. And that feeling of achievement really helps with elevating your self-worth. When you suffer from PTSD, you really don't see much value in your life, as every good feeling seems to be stripped from you. So an elevated feeling of self-worth really helps. So I hope others can understand the wonderful connection APP has with helping those suffering from PTSD.
Well, Nate and Mitzi, that was amazing. We really appreciate all the great information about Athens Photographic Project. We thank you for your personal perspective, Mitzi. It just opens the world to us, and it's just really a powerful statement. So we thank you for that. And so I'm expecting that we're going to shift gears and go into some great things now to hear from okay. All right. Yes, with Project Jericho, Lo Howard is going to speak to us about what's going on in Springfield, Ohio. Lo?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm feeling so inspired from Nate and Mitzi, and I have a soft spot. My background is in photography, so I feel like I needed to make a trip to Athens soon. And again, I want to echo what Nate said about thanking the OAC for shining a spotlight on this topic, and also just for the opportunity to share a little bit about Project Jericho's story over here in Springfield and in Clark County. So if you're not familiar, Project Jericho is a program of Clark State Community College, and we were created in 1999, and we have been providing high quality visual and performing arts programming for youth and families across Clark County since then. So we too are getting ready to celebrate 20 years, and that is just a really exciting time for us here at Project Jericho. So we are a program, really a collaborative program of Clark State Community College, but our main funders and support systems are Clark County Department of Job and Family Services and, of course, the Ohio Arts Council, two entities that have been with us from the very beginning. So it's a result of our partnership with Clark County Department of Job and Family Services, as well as our partnership with the Clark County Juvenile Court, that kind of directs and guides who we prioritize through our programming. We have so much I could share, but today I'm going to mostly focus on our programming that serves youth who are impacted by the juvenile justice system. And something here in Clark County that we're really fortunate to have is, first of all, strong leadership. We have had incredible leadership at our juvenile court and our other county agencies that have been open-minded towards the arts and have welcomed us into their facilities since 2006. A lot of other places in the state or even across the country are just now kind of gathering around this idea of making sure that art is a part of an individual's experience while they're incarcerated. And here in Springfield, we're finishing 13 years of bringing art and letting it infiltrate that incarcerated experience. So we're very fortunate, and we're also very lucky that our Clark County Juvenile Court and our Clark County Juvenile Detention Center are in the same space. They're in the same building. So the court is on the first floor and then the detention center is above it. And they have really opened their doors to allow us to bring art in and to build relationships with both their staff and administration, as well as the youth that we are focusing on inside that facility. So this spring at Project Jericho, we have been just kind of stuck on this quote that is from a legend herself, from Maya Angelou, and it is, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you." And that has kind of been a quote that has allowed us to process some of the trauma that our participants have been bringing in, because the nature of who we serve in making art accessible to all, a lot of the families and the youth that we serve have endured what I believe is some of the very worst things that this world has to offer. And in the first part of this webinar series, when they reflected on ACEs, I was kind of doing a little bit of my own reflection and research, and just looking at the list, it just is so reflective of who we have served at Project Jericho for 20 years. And in the 6 years that I've been here, I can say that I have seen so much of this firsthand. So this quote has given us a little bit of context and a little bit of space to know that our youth and our families are holding on to stories that are untold. Maybe they don't have the safest place or the right audience to share that. And like Nate was just showing, some of the barriers that exist because of their experience or what they have been through. So today I want to tell you a little bit about who we serve. I hope you can kind of get a sense of the why behind what we do, and then how we go about that. And then a few quick words from participants that hopefully speak to the impact that our program is making. So I've kind of titled it Building Intentional Programming for Survivors and Overcomers, because that's what I believe our participants are. I think so many of us in this world have survived and overcome, and that's a spirit that we want to admonish and encourage here at Project Jericho. So all of our programming includes the arts. I love that. We cannot remove the arts from our program. We bring in a professional teaching artist. We engage in both the visual and the performing arts. And our outcomes and what we found to be true is that the arts can make an impact on self-esteem, communication. Here at Clark State, we're able to introduce our participants and make higher education more accessible. And then we also are trying to delve into this concept of resiliency, and can we grow it and can we strengthen it in those that we serve. So I know we're reflecting on the nation's numbers, but here in Ohio, our numbers aren't pretty as far as trauma. So 1 in 7 youth have experienced 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. And that number doesn't sit super well with me. And there's another number at Project Jericho that really caught our attention a couple years ago, where about 34% of the teenagers in Clark County reported experiencing depression or sadness or anxiety for long periods of time. So that's 1 in 3 kids. And I know a lot of kids, so that number didn't sit well with us. So that's when we really started to build programs that were intentionally directed at bringing about dialogue and opportunities for healing, and for a safe place for kids' voice. And we all know, since we're in the arts, we know that art has the power to heal and to bring about newness and to cultivate joy and to help us process what we've been through. And so pairing the arts and some of Ohio's most resilient people, we've kind of created this model for programming that I'm excited to share with you just a window in today. So there's a couple pillars that are so important, our foundation here at Project Jericho, things that we prioritize at all costs. And the first one that I want to talk about today is the atmosphere. In no particular order with my little bullet points, I have to say that the word that our participants use and give us is, they say that Project Jericho feels like family. And if it feels like family, that means that we're doing something right. But we believe that families have hard conversations, and families confront, and families celebrate the good days, but families are also present in the really hard moments too. So we work to cultivate an atmosphere where our kids and our families have their basic needs met. And the sad thing, but I guess also beautiful thing about our detention center here, is that students do have their needs met. You know, they're clothed, they're fed, they're safe, they're around adults who care about them. They have that structure that Nate was just speaking to. And we believe that structure is necessary, that we need that to thrive. We were created to have some structure and also awareness of expectations. Our students and our participants know what we're expecting of them. And also we tell them, you can expect this from us as well. We talk about our values and we say, we hope that you will embody these, but you can also expect that we do too. So in an attempt to make things feel like family, we prioritize those assets. And I love that our participants experience family, because some of them, I'm sure, have not experienced the healthiest examples of family. And so that they get a taste of that at Project Jericho is important to us, and it's something that we protect. Speaking to atmosphere, this was a moment that happened in the early part of the year. We had the opportunity to bring in Aquila Theatre out of London. They were doing a tour through the United States, and they did an hour-long workshop inside the Juvenile Detention Center. I thought they were going to be performing, which is what I had shared with the students. I was wrong. They were actually inviting the participants to, or the kids to participate. So it was a full-on workshop. So our students were a little bit caught off guard, and there was an odd number of girls, which meant I had to participate. So I got a true experience of what it felt like to be a student that day. And these two teaching artists and performers were just incredible, incredible people. And when it came to an end, one of the young men, who was a little hesitant at first, he wasn't, I just think he was a little too cool for school, and he didn't want to be vulnerable, and theater requires vulnerability. But when we wrapped up and we were saying our goodbyes, he looked at us just blankly and said, for an hour, I forgot that I was in jail. And to me, that is the power of the arts, that art can transport us and transform our surroundings so that we have a bit of a reprieve, a bit of a break of maybe our circumstances or just the reality of our lives. So I truly believe that theater and the performing arts can create a new space and a new atmosphere. And that young man that day definitely felt that. He also couldn't believe that they came all the way from London to do that workshop. And I did not have the heart to tell him that they were in the United States to do a lot of other workshops and performances. But for him to feel that he was that special and that worth it, that just says a lot to the power of the arts. So the next key component, and perhaps the most important, I probably should have put this first, is relationships. At Project Jericho, we believe that relationships are, they're everything. And we go above and beyond to make sure that our participants experience healthy relationships. So we are really fortunate that the state of Ohio and even our region down here in Southwest Ohio, we have such a saturated landscape of incredible teaching artists. Just both visual and performing, we are surrounded by incredible people. So we bring in the best quality, and the same thing for our volunteers. Sometimes some of our volunteers have been with us since the start, which means they've been with us for 20 years. But we just want our kids to have access to high quality people who love what they do and who want to be there sharing their art form with our participants and our students. So that is a relationship we prioritize. We also make sure that we have healthy boundaries. That's kind of a way I feel like we protect our staff and our teaching artists and volunteers, because it is sometimes these stories are heavy to carry around. But we set up healthy boundaries because we want our participants to be able to replicate that in their lives, because so often the consequence of unhealthy relationships and lack of boundaries can increase their experiences with trauma. So we are all about healthy boundaries and also consistency. We know that our participants have experienced a lot of loss and a lot of change and chaos. So whenever we can get consistency, we take it. And we're really in a great spot right now at Project Jericho, where we've had the same staff since 2015, and many of our teaching artists return year after year. And so those relationships become long-term and beautiful, and ultimately the relationships are the most rewarding part of this work. So on the screen, you can see a young man working side by side with his probation officer in a program that we call A Mile in My Shoes. And they are each customizing white vans and having dialogue. We created this program that brought dialogue and intentional conversation so that they could realize that they probably have more in common than they realize. And, just shared experiences, and also to kind of elevate their relationship to not just be business or professional in the sense of probation officer to probationer, but to be humans, that we're all humans. So that's a special project that we've been able to offer a few times. And we're so grateful that our probation officers and our caseworkers and the staff and administrators in this community are so willing to go above and beyond for students. And for that, we are grateful. This is kind of a quote that I felt like encapsulated our priority on relationships. And it comes from a mother who has participated in our family programming, as well as she's been an audience member and an encourager to her daughters who have participated in our youth programming. And I just feel like Shelley articulates that through Project Jericho and through the arts and through intentional programming, she has been able to witness the best in her girls, and her girls have learned to see that within themselves. And then I also love at the end, Shelley's just always authentic, and I love that about her, but she's saying thank you for sticking with us, because that's what families do, is you ride the waves together and you stick it out and you hold people accountable and you show up. And we're just grateful that our participants, they bring just as much of that to our program as our staff and our team over at Project Jericho tries to do every day. A third component, which I was so pleased to see that this was brought about in the first webinar, and hearing Nate talk, I feel like we're cousins, so much of our program overlaps. We believe that the process is always more important than the product. We say process over product all the time in our office and in our programming, and we want our participants to know we start with the end in mind. So just as Nate was saying, a beginning, middle, and end, we want them to know where are we headed, because as I've alluded to, they have a lot of uncertainty in their life. And if we can create a space where they know what is expected and where we're working towards, we're just bound to experience more success. So we begin with the end in mind. We tell them what we're hoping to achieve. We also try to break tasks into smaller tasks, because sometimes it's too overwhelming. So we break it down into smaller, and we trust the process. And that is all something that we do in an effort to make it replicable and relatable to their life. Because if we spoon feed them all the instruction, they'll never be able to take that and apply it to their day-to-day life as they get older and as they hopefully one day create families of their own. So it is about that sequential learning. It is about what comes next. Let's think ahead. We have a couple programs that are even kind of self-motivated, where students set goals and then we just help hold them accountable and encourage them, help them problem solve, because we want them to take ownership over their success and over their failures, because honestly, that's how we grow. We grow when we fail. So, and that last thing I know you've heard me say is that we work through hard things. We have an unspoken rule at Project Jericho that we try not to throw things away. Sometimes when a kid gets frustrated, they will erase it and then they'll want to crumple up and throw it away and start over. And there's sometimes a time and a place for that, but most often we say, nope, we're not going to throw it away. You've invested into this, let's work through it, because that's life. In life, we got to work through the hard stuff. This is a reflection from a young man who participated in a programming with the artist that was just featured in that last slide, James Pate, who's an award-winning artist and just an incredible man. And so this participant was reflecting on how mixing values reminded him of life and its situations. And I thought that just spoke to how the process does matter, and our kids are picking up on it. They definitely latch on to that. And I love that, they said, I'm going to start strong and then I'm going to finish strong. And I did. So he was in his component, and they did do a great job. And we love it when a student can self-reflect on what they achieved and what that means for them. Another important component is collaboration. We believe that we're all on the same team. We do believe it takes a village to raise kids, and it's our community's job to wrap ourselves around our participants and our families. And so we say that we're all on the same team, and this looks different for different situations, but mostly it means that all of us adults that are pouring into students or families, we are there for their success and for their safety. And we try to use similar language so that they know They have a clear idea of what it is that they're supposed to be working towards. And we also know at Project Jericho what our strengths are, and we certainly know what our weaknesses are. So we stay in our own lane, and we connect our participants with community resources all the time, whether it's mental health providers or the Second Harvest Food Bank or a local philanthropic group that provided beds to a family that didn't have any, or our park system, restaurants, the farmers market, whatever it might be. We connect our participants with our community resources. And I brag about Springfield a lot, but we have a very collaborative spirit here in Clark County. We have agencies and individuals and leaders who are all about collaboration because we do believe that is in the best interest of our community as a whole. So whenever possible, we link our participants to those community resources and encourage those connections. The last piece of collaboration that's so important to us is to always include the families in the art making experience. Some of our programming is just that, is for the families to create together. But with our youth programming, we want to make sure parents are caught up and up to speed on what their kids are creating. And so we believe that if you want to change the life of a child, you've got to also make an impact on their parents or their caregivers. And so we bring their families to the table, and we're able to do this in public art celebrations and installations, performances, and art shows. And also, we make a lot of phone calls at Project Jericho. We send a lot of mail. We reach out any way possible. We show up to court hearings. We show up to reviews because we want the family to know that they are supported. So without collaborators, I don't think we would have survived 20 years, but that is absolutely the lifeblood of who we are and what we do. This final thought from Tasha Golden, who's one of our teaching artists, she kind of encapsulated what, on a broader view, sometimes when we get in the trenches at Project Jericho, it's hard for us to zoom out, but I feel like she kind of put words to a zoomed out view that through Project Jericho and through the arts, we get to capitalize on the best that the arts have to offer and offer a safe space and supports and connectedness to people who, yes, might have felt isolated or unwelcomed or just not a part of an active, engaged community member. So we're grateful to have teaching artists who are studying the effects of art and public health, and we're so lucky to have her on our team. Lastly, I want to close with hope. That is really what we're working towards at Project Jericho, is we want our participants and our families to feel hope. We believe that we are all meant to reach our potential. And so we want to create a space where participants have the chance to reach their potential. We all have a different potential, but we want them to know that they're capable and that they're worthy of that. And also, I know I shared that Ohio does not have the greatest stats on trauma, but in light of our trauma, just the widespread presence of it, that also means that we have the most potential to be resilient. And we see that here at Project Jericho in our students and our families. And yeah, they're some of the bravest, most courageous people that we know. And they make it so easy to get up and come to this work every day. And we're so pleased to have just avenues to engage our youth in long-term relationships. So once they're released from the court or from the detention facility, we're able to get them plugged into programming as quickly as possible because we believe that art does change lives and they need more of it. And so we also want them to know that there is light in dark places. And sometimes you got to look for the light. Sometimes you got to create the light. Sometimes you are the light. But we believe that art is a light in darkness and art illuminates darkness. So we are going to create space for hope, and we want our participants to have hope because we know that their lives are hard and challenging, and we want them to look at their future with excitement and with joy at the potential of what it could be. So in closing, is it hard? Is sometimes the secondhand trauma, is it real? Yes, it's hard. Is it worth it? Are these kids worthy? Always. And are we going to continue doing the work? Absolutely. We're so fortunate that this community and this state embraces the arts, and we're just pleased to be here and be a part of it. I really do want to say thank you for engaging in this dialogue and conversation because we do think it's important. And I think that it just gives voice to people who need that. I also included, just on this last slide, a couple different resources that have been helpful for me and for our team that kind of shed light on trauma and the effects that it has on youth and families. And so you're welcome to check those out. It has helped give me a broader picture and a more complete picture of what our families are up against and what we can do to work together to grow and to overcome for the future. So thank you so much for listening. I'll turn it back over to my friends at the OAC.
Thank you so much, Lo and Nate and Mitzi. I think now we still have a few minutes. We can open up the floor to questions. Just a reminder to everybody that if you have a question, feel free to type it in using the Q&A box on your control panel there, and we will get to it. It looks like we do have a few questions. So this first one is for you, Lo. Obviously, Project Jericho works with youth in detention. Do you have any statistics on how the arts-related projects affect recidivism?
That is a great question, and one that I just spoke to our juvenile judge about this week, actually. So recidivism is kind of a confusing topic because not everybody has the same definition of it, but what we've seen at Project Jericho is that if we can engage students in programming, and we know it's not just Project Jericho, it's other resources and other support systems, we can engage them, especially in the after-school hours, which is the most frequented time for crimes that are committed. And then if we can just hang on to them, what we're trying to do at Project Jericho is to terminate kids from probation. So that's what we are really working towards. And we have seen that. Just last week, we had a girl that was terminated from probation, and she was telling everybody about it. She was so proud. But there aren't a lot of good numbers about it because recidivism is such a difficult and kind of transient conversation. Some people don't define it the same, but that is absolutely what we're working towards. We're trying to get ahead of it. We're trying to prevent students from having contact with the court system. So we really pour into our diversion program, which are nonviolent kind of status offenders that aren't quite as serious of crimes, and maybe some of those kids haven't even served time upstairs. And so with our diversion program, we're able to kind of catch kids before their behavior changes or gets a little more serious. But I promise that the concept and the conversation around reducing recidivism is brought up continually, and it's heavy on my heart, and we're just trying to do our part here in Clark County to get ahead of it, because I think that might be our best chance at making a dent in it altogether.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was great. This next one is for Nate. So does the Athens Photographic Project work with current or formerly incarcerated individuals in state or county institutions? And if not, has any thought been given to this as potential additional collaboration?
Sure. So historically, that hasn't been our focus, but with our youth program, that has we've really recognized kind of the need both in Athens and surrounding counties for youth services, both as a mental health support, kind of modeled after what we've been, the work we've been doing with the adults coming into our programming. But we've found that the courts are interested in alternative methods, like Lo was talking about. So, for example, so we have more of a focus, I would say, in our youth programming with that, just as Lo was describing. Like in Chillicothe, for example, our program is embedded. Right now, our youth program that's currently going on, it's a 10-week program. It's embedded at the court. So there's, that group of teens is receiving services at the court, and they're also engaged in a photography curriculum that is it's focused on relationships. So it's the kind of 3 units of that curriculum are relationships with self, relationships with family, caregivers, etc., and community. And that theme for the curriculum, really resonated out of the needs and what we were hearing over the past couple of years of our pilot youth project from kids. But it also kind of echoes what we've seen from the adults coming into our program and that need for relationships. So I was really it was great to hear Lo describing that and kind of making such a point of that, because I think that is what, whether it's teens or adults or folks associated with the courts or the mental health system, everybody is needing more and more relationships, positive, solid, consistent relationships, meaningful relationships, being able to have dialogues through art about things you can't talk about at the grocery store.
That's right.
Okay, great. So this is for either one of you. You both kind of talked about secondhand trauma and the things that can happen to, you know, staff and volunteers. Do you perceive hesitancy or specific challenges in working with people who have experienced trauma?
Ooh, I would say, Nate, you want to take this one?
If you want to start, and I'll chime in.
Okay. You know, we at Project Jericho, and maybe it's my own just personal belief, we just say that empathy will change the world. And so with empathy, you know, you do have to have the right posture going into this work. And that posture has to be one of, we're not trying to save people. That's not our job. We are just recognizing our role and knowing that, that I love that the research says that if a child has one caring and trusting adult in their life, that the research shows that that can buffer the effects of trauma. So we're just recognizing our place in it. It does get a little heavy sometimes, and I think that's the importance of being surrounded by great staff and great volunteers, because some days are heavier for me than my coworkers, or some stories hit me harder than others. And you know, you do have to take care of yourself, but I think if you come in with the right posture and the right attitude, you can prevent a lot of that, I guess, just the onslaught of hearing what can be very traumatic to hear, just knowing that people you care about are experiencing just absolutely atrocious things. So I don't know if that's a direct answer, but that's kind of how we view it here at Project Jericho. And of course, we're mindful of who, both teaching artists and volunteers, we're mindful of who we bring into this space, because not everybody is cut out for it, and that's okay. We all have different strengths. So I guess that's kind of how, I hope I wasn't dancing around that. That's just kind of how we bridge that, those kind of gaps.
No, I think that was great. Nate, did you have anything to add?
Sure, yeah. I guess I would echo that. We do the same exact thing at Athens Photo Project. Is, you know, we're looking for folks, you know, in our community, or, I mean, recently in this past year, some really caring folks came to us that relocated to Athens to work with us from Kent, Ohio, and from Kentucky. But it's like we are always looking for folks that want to be in this kind of gray area and mental health support, where you know, they're coming in, you know, their role, you know, their overt role is as, you know, a photography instructor, but really the reality of it is they're stepping into relationship, and ideally those are long-term relationships. The instructors we've had engaged previously with us were involved for years, and they started as volunteers and became interns, and then did AmeriCorps with us, and then became full-time staff. So it was, for them, it was about kind of finding a place where they could be supportive, and they could also maintain some balance. They could hear the stories and witness the stories that people have experienced, and not take it on as something that they had to change, right? So I think the arts are very appropriate for this sense of kind of building dialogue around trauma, and when things are coming up and are being brought up that that aren't connecting with the arts. So kind of the line that we have is when things we're coming to our staff or our volunteers that may be trauma related, we're there to be supportive and be witnessing, but if it feels like the process, the arts process and the arts education process and arts mentorship process, et cetera, ultimately isn't kicking in and engaging and doing something with that energy, right, then we typically refer someone over to our clinical partner, as I mentioned before, to Hopewell, because our staff's not trained really to manage that level of kind of clinical support. But a lot of times the art process and that arts mentorship relationship will do something kind of just spontaneously with those stories. And yeah, so that's how we navigate it. Is if we feel like the arts process can help, we let it naturally unfold. If we feel like the arts process isn't kicking in, then it typically becomes a little bit more than our teaching artists can handle.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, knowing kind of where to draw the line on things and when time to hand it off or keep it in place. That's I think that's a really important distinction too. I think we are coming up on our time here. I don't know, Chiquita, Jared, did either of you have anything you'd like to say before we part ways?
Just what an amazing webinar this has been. I'm just really grateful to the three of you for the perspectives that you brought. It's just very hopeful, it's very inspiring, and I'd love to replicate you across the country. So thank you so much for everything you do.
Yeah, likewise. This is Jared here. The work that you all do is so important. I'm currently at an arts and corrections conference myself, and the concept of trauma, it pervades all parts of everyone's lives, really, whether or not people realize it. So thank you to Project Jericho, Athens Photographic Project, and all the listeners for joining us. I think, it's a tough fight, but it's important. And there's strength in numbers, people. So let's keep up the good work. So thank you all for the opportunity to listen to your fabulous programs.
Thanks, Jared. I just want to echo what Chiquita and Jared said. Thank you so much to Lo and Nate for coming on and talking about the really important work that you guys are doing with trauma-impacted individuals. And Mitzi, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your personal experience. That was really powerful for me to hear, as I'm sure it was for everyone who was listening. And I just want to thank everyone, again, who is listening. And finally, mark your calendars. Our next webinar is Thursday, July 18th, and we will be welcoming Cece Dadisman, who's a nationally recognized leader in digital and social media marketing. And so she's going to present Market Smarter, Not Harder, using your own data for marketing success. So for all of you marketers out there, whether you're part of a big organization, a small organization, all budget sizes, she is here to help you. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you again to everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks a lot.